try to analyze, if someone is talking about reading, what are they talking about? What part of the whole reading process are they talking about? There's so much confusion and so many misstatements about what happens in reading, mostly because of lack of precision in language. People are referring to reading without actually thinking about all these different components, the steps involved, how they're related. You now have more ability, if you remember that, to think about this than even some of the top researchers, top educators in the world. They misuse these words or use them in very vague ways often. So I hope it doesn't drive you as crazy as it drives me when I read articles now, but it will at least hopefully give you some clarity when there are statements that seem to conflict with each other about reading. Questions? Okay. Can you think of any implications this has for teaching? I don't really expect you to yet. By the end of the day, I hope you will. Yes?
I hadn't really thought about how visualization aids one to monitor comprehension so much. That's just an interesting link that I hadn't thought about. And
Yes.
there, I think even at any level, there are times when a visual is really important for building vocabulary of something new, like teaching Beowulf. You know, there are architectural structures that are referred to that we aren't familiar with, that showing them an image will
Yes.
then really help them to monitor, are they following along, because they now have, I think that's really, that link is really interesting.
Yes, I almost included an example in here that I didn't, and I'll in just a moment, about, it was language related to a castle that involved the use of the word turret.
Right.
And if the students hadn't understood turret, then the next parts would have also been less clear.
Right.
But they could probably use those next parts to guess what a turret would be. And that's
Right.
exactly the kind of thing that, if they're building the picture in their mind as they go,
Right.
they can realize the need to do that.
Right.
But if they're not, that part will they'll skip over that part
Right.
sort of, and then they'll miss the point about
Right.
the attackers and the defenders and the need to understand their relative location to each other and all of that. So
Right.
yes, that's exactly
Yeah.
the point of the visualizing,
Right.
which we'll talk about quite a bit more later on in the day. Thank you. Kathy.
Along the same lines, Laura, the implication is how do we enhance the experience of the student
Yes.
so that they can have this visualization?
Yep. I hope that at the end of the day you can answer that.
I just started thinking you could answer it for me.
That's my plan. I want to make sure that it's clear to you. Okay, how do we enhance the experience of the students so that they can visualize? Is that what you said?
Well, to complete the reception of the message, yeah.
Okay, yep. Okay. What's your name?
Dan, sorry.
Dan. I'm sorry too. I didn't ask everybody's names at the beginning.
That's okay. No, it was along those lines. So prior knowledge is gonna come into play a lot.
Yes.
And one of the things I struggle with my kids in science textbooks
Yes.
is they see a lot of pictures of like, yay, less reading.
Yes.
What they're not understanding that the chart, the graph is critical to the understanding.
Yes.
That's why it's there, because it's expensive to put on the page. You don't put them there unless they're necessary. And
Not just for
and
decoration.
even the most advanced kids, I
Yes.
struggle with getting them to look at all that stuff on the sides.
Yes, and understand the point of it. What's the phrase you just said?
What's that? Prior knowledge?
Thank you. Oh, I'm having a mental block.
But when you're talking about St. Thomas Aquinas, going to organize all that stuff in his head, most of us aren't that brilliant.
Right.
So those
Speak
graphs and
yourself.
charts, I don't think you can, but those things are to do that organization for you, that you can't get that out of the reading, so
Right.
you need to look at it. And then if the chart isn't making sense, I'm trying to get them to, then you need to ask me, you're missing the point,
Yes, yeah, and be able to observe it and analyze it until it does make sense.
right?
Yes, yep. Cool, this is good. We'll get to things related to that. And did anybody else have questions, comments, ideas about how implications this would have for your own teaching?
I think we give up as educators way too early on reading our students. They need to listen more.
Yes. That actually is very true. And there have been plenty of studies to show it, the value of reading aloud, even at the high school, even at the college level. So it just continues to be valuable. I almost read aloud to you today also, but it's another thing that I cut out. So you won't have that. But when I've done it before, adults usually love it. You don't usually
Everybody
just get to
loves it.
sit there and listen to a good story read to you. So I wish I were giving you that enjoyable experience today, but it will come out more later today too, I think. Why you're justified in doing that. It's not just, I don't know, fluff. It's not just an easy way out of spending time on something else, as long as you thought it through, of course. All right, so. This is also a quote from the author of Good Thinking, that book that I mentioned earlier. I showed a quote from earlier. So the author, Eric Palmer, says, "When I wrote a different book, I had an uphill battle trying to persuade many others that we needed to address the poor oral communication that our students demonstrate every day." So poor oral communication, how is that relevant for what we're discussing, what we've been talking about so far today? How is our discussion so far related to oral communication? John?
I would assume that the oral communication is the other side of the diagram, and so it's going to be a lot of the same processes in reverse.
Yes. Yay, thank you. So it's the output right up here, this part that I've now taken off a little bit. But when we start with a picture in our mind, and we want to put that picture in somebody else's mind, then we have to translate it into spoken language to allow that to happen. That's what distinguishes us primarily from animals. We can do that. We can imagine and convey by moving our tongue and our vocal folds and our lungs in these amazing little intricate ways, and somehow that conveys to the person a very similar picture in their mind. Usually not exactly the same, which is where change and miscommunication occurs, but it can be very close. And the more precise we're able to be in our oral communication, the fewer differences there are between what's in our head and what's in the other person's head. We can make up for their lack of background knowledge or lack of the same experiences as us in order to fill in, predict what they might not get by us using vague language, and make this same picture in their mind that we had in our mind, which can be a more literal picture, again, like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, or it can be an abstract series of concepts, like if you're studying St. Thomas Aquinas. Okay, so what would be the opposite of listening, or kind of the output skill related to the input of listening?
Speaking?
Yes, thank you. It's not more difficult than that. So listening comprehension is related to speaking composition. They both have the word comp. So this upper part of this whole thing, you could think of as the comp part of it. Just like we can use listening skills when we're reading, when we're not actually hearing something, but we're activating the same parts of our brain that we use for listening. Similarly, we can activate the same parts of our brain that we use for speaking just by trying to come up with the words that we're going to say. So we use these speaking composition processes even when we're just imagining in our minds what we'll say without actually speaking it out loud. All right, so the point of this is not that we speak, it's that we compose, but it's closely related to speaking. So spoken language here, I'm going to use completely interchangeably with oral language. So spoken and oral are the same for our purposes today. So Eric Palmer refers to oral communication here. That equates to this spoken language bubble in the middle here. That spoken language bubble could have a heart around it too, just the way the word did. It's crucial for everything in literacy. All of our reading and writing skills revolve literally around the spoken language skills. This last part, I'll just tell you, the opposite of decoding would be encoding, which is spelling, but it can also include all the other components of getting the words down on a page, handwriting or typing or whatever other skills are needed. So the combination of using our composition skills and our encoding skills equals what?
Right.
Yes, writing. So the input side is reading, the output side is writing. The input side involves the listening, taking in that way. The output side involves the speaking, producing. All right? So now to this 30 million word gap study that I briefly referred to earlier, to emphasize the importance of spoken language in the development of all of these skills. So Hart and Risley published a study in 1995 that then they've rewritten about again in 2003. It involved 42 families, 1,300 hours of live recording of children's lives from birth to age 4, and 23 million bytes of information, little bits of encoded words that the authors studied for a long time before they actually published it. What they found was what's become known as this 30 million word gap. That means that by the age of 4, there was a 30 million word difference between the number of words heard by children who heard the least number of words from their parents and children who heard the most number of words from their parents. So it was actually a difference between about hearing 13 million words and hearing 45 million words. So it's more like 32 million word gap. Can you imagine that difference in input? The effect that that has on those forming of mental representations, forming of the spoken language representations, the ability to make those connections. So about 13 million words for the kids who had the least input, 45 million words for the kids who had the most input. Yes, this one.
I was just at a park with people watching their children.
Yes,
It struck me so much that even since 2003,
yes.
so many more parents are doing this while their kids are playing and they're sort of keeping them safe, but they don't talk to them, they don't interact with them.
To demonstrate some of that, these articles are almost all about that. Yes, I'm only going to talk about it for one sentence on the slide today, but this is to show you that I could have talked about it for a lot longer. So there's only the beginnings of studies on it, but there's enough to show. Yes?
Does it matter if the people are actually there? I'm just thinking of
Yes.
comparing it to like television.
Yes,
as
that has
visual
been
efforts.
specifically studied. Actually, that's one of the earliest things that I learned in grad school that was completely fascinating to me. I mentioned that I was studying kids who were deaf. So there are children who are not deaf who have 2 deaf parents. So when television first came out, when television was first invented, at first, so children of deaf adults, CODA, called CODA, the CODA group, it was a very exciting thing for people who were trying to help CODA kids, that they thought if we put television in front of them all the time, they're going to learn language. They're going to have all that exposure that other kids have all the time in their daily life. But didn't work at all, and it still doesn't, and that has been reshown in a bunch of those studies. And it's not only that electronic communication doesn't help, it's also that it's child-directed speech. It's directed to the child, that's what matters. It's not just speech that they overhear among other adults. So it could be speech that they overhear among other children, that's not studied, but it's not speech between other adults. What matters is that children receive lots of language directed to them, and they're encouraged to return it. So conversational turns are also very significant. The number of times that the child speaks, the adult speaks, then the child attempts to speak back and forth. It's legitimate, though, to just keep referring to the number of words that they hear, because the number of words they hear is completely correlated to the number of conversation turns and the quality that they hear. So this will make sense to you. A parent who does not speak often to their child isn't going to have their few words be something like, what is the word I was trying to think of? I blanked out on the main word I wanted to use, but it's buried in my slides. I'm not going to look for it right now. They're not going to say something like, chew your rutabaga completely before consuming it, please. They're going to say, eat your food. The quality is completely related to the quantity. A parent who said that first sentence that I said is going to go on and on and on and on. And they'll use words that are synonyms with each other, which will help the child to learn what consume means. They'll use eat and chew and swallow, and so the child will eventually understand the connections between all of those, be building up all those representations. Does this make sense? So this is one of, I think, it's not just academic, it's our moral responsibility to spread that word, let parents know, be direct with your family members. Let them know that if, here's the next part of this. Oh, well, so the big part of this Hart and Risley study that was the focus, I really wanted to include this just in case any of you were really familiar with it already, but it almost isn't relevant. But the big thing that was the focus in the Hart and Risley study was that lower socioeconomic status kids tended to hear fewer words, and that was a big explanation for why they tended to have lower academic achievement. So basically everything can be attributed to that. All of the other language and cognitive deficits go right back to the amount of language that the child has and their ability to develop those mental representations, know the connections between them, which allows for thinking skills, critical thinking skills, ability to understand what they hear and produce language, all of that. Yes?
How does that affect with, let's say, English as a second language, Spanish and so on and so forth, and then they go to school not knowing English?
The short answer is it's okay. The longer answer, which I could go in a lot more detail, but is that what matters is that kids receive rich language input. So that they receive, ideally, the native language of their parents so that the input is rich. Then, when they've developed all those structures and ability to make connections and understanding of how language works, they will be much more easily able to listen to another language and learn it, especially up to the age of about 7. So what it looks like in school is slower development early on. It's similar to kids who are hard of hearing or have had heavy ear infections over and over when they're children. So their development is slower at first in school, but it catches up. And not the hearing impaired kids or the kids who have a lot of ear infections, but the second language learning kids actually then have an advantage cognitively, if everything else is equal.
I've done research, or we did research actually due to the ESL school I worked with, but then my wife being from Brazil, she only speaks Portuguese at home, and then I come home and then we do both. We have a
That's
mixture.
fantastic, yeah.
So,
And so, how old are your kids?
7 and 2.
Okay, so you've already seen it with your 7-year-old probably that he or she?
She moved away from speaking Portuguese though real quick. She was like,
Yeah.
I'm done. And I mean,
Okay.
she can understand it
Yes.
really well.
Yes.
She just doesn't want to speak it.
Yeah.
She wants to stay with
Yep,
English.
and that's more typical of girls than boys. And it's very typical over time in all cultures, all generations, so especially younger people, it's not true though necessarily. People latch on to a group and they want to use the language of that group and the dialect features, all that. Oh, there was another, yes.
I'm probably gonna jump way too far ahead. Is there a way to close this?
Yes, and that is what the rest of today will be about. Some of the things that have been used to do that.
I'm sorry,
No, it's all right.
the question I had was in terms of language development. It seems that there are some people who've learned a foreign language, possibly just from watching English language programs on TV and that sort of thing. And,
Yes.
so I've also read that 1-year-olds who are exposed to a foreign language, like you were saying, don't pick it up. And so is there a point at which, developmentally speaking, people are more able to essentially learn something through video, not through direct interaction with another person?
Let's see. I don't know the answer to that in total general terms, but I do know specifically for learning a second language, actually particularly for learning English. This way, that's what's been studied the most. It's been learned the most by people from other countries who have never been to an English-speaking country, just that way. The process that they use to learn neurologically is different than a child learning a language in the first place.
Right.
So they rely on the frameworks that they already have in place for language and comparison of what they're hearing to their own native language at first, and then it can abstract away from that and the English can have its own structure in their mind. But in order for them to learn by video, they have to be highly motivated and already have constructs in their brain to learn language. So they're not going to learn language for the first time from video. And without internal motivation, they're not going to learn from video. Is that, yeah. So that answers that. Okay, so back to this idea of low socioeconomic status. Let's see, single most predictive factor of later academic achievement to elicit quality. We've kind of already answered why. I was going to have you discuss that, but I think we've done it. So newer findings related to this, I'm going to give you just one article. I actually would have changed my mind about what article, I photocopied it too early. I found another article this weekend that I probably would have made as the primary one that I give you, but for now, this is kind of a follow-up on Hart and Risley. It's not a description of an actual study, but it's just a little summary. Oh, thank you again. Go. I'm going to summarize it for you too.
What's article you just found?
Well, I don't know which one I decide on, but there's one, that's this one, linguistic input, electronic media, and communication outcomes of toddlers with hearing loss is the focus of the article, but they refer to kids without hearing loss as part of the article too. But really the summary is the answer to the question you already asked. It's electronic devices replace spoken language interactions in families, regardless of socioeconomic status. That's the point of this article. There's several points in this article, but the reason that I'm giving it to you is because in case people were really focused on the socioeconomic status part of Hart and Risley, if you had heard of it before, I wanted to completely eradicate from your mind that factor, because now that's been shown to be much less relevant, especially as electronic media plays a role across all socioeconomic status groups. So,
Wait, can you say that again? So
yes,
it doesn't matter, like, now, it doesn't matter whether you're poor or not, it's a matter of just how much you talk to your kid, period.
yes.
Okay.
And that amount of talking to kids can overcome poverty.
Mhm.
So if parents are in a poverty situation, but have this rich language input for their child can be right up there with kids from high socioeconomic status.
So the old correlation was that people who were poor generally just spoke to their kids less, for
Yes.
whatever reason.
Yeah, I can tell about that. It's usually working 3 jobs, it's that kind of thing.
Right.
Lack of patience, lack of interest.
Right.
They're mostly commands, eat your food, do this, be quiet.
Right, and not like some deeper, richer, we have
Yes.
more time to talk this over kind of
Yes.
thing. And now you're saying that there isn't that correlation anymore, it's just, it's,
Well, there is that correlation still, but it's completely, the deeper correlation is the language, it's completely explained by the amount of language input that the parent gives to the child.
okay.
And so that amount of language input that a parent gives to a child is just as relevant at the high socioeconomic status groups. And so students like those at Lansing Catholic primarily, who have typically had a great advantage in terms of the amount of language input they've had throughout their lives, can now show very similar patterns to those that have typically been associated with low socioeconomic status families, students, because of the lack of language input and the lack of richness of discussion around dinner tables, around family events, trips to the zoo, the museum, even discussions of the construction site that you pass. You know, just when people are absorbed, they're not using the context around them to have rich language discussions nearly as much. Questions or comments? Yes.
The focus has been on early children. Does
Yes.
this apply where we are 14, 15,
Yes.
18?
Thank you, it does. It applies all the way up through adolescence. Adults haven't really been studied as far as I can find. I looked for that this weekend too. But it has been studied up through adolescence and it it does seem to apply. It's been studied much, much, much more among birth to age 4, but it continues to be true. One of these articles in here talks about that, at least one of them, so. I know what one I'm looking for. It's called something like Children, Adolescents, and the Digital Age. Oh, Children and Adolescents and Digital Media. That might be one you want to take a look at, but it's the same story. Yes?
We talked in our English department about, even some of our highest achieving students, they cannot absolutely erase from their own writing signs of text language and postings. And so I would say that our students who are reading, it isn't even really reading the way society's always known reading. It's a mixture of flipping through images and reading little quick blotches of text,
Yes.
not well-composed text.
Yes, which is actually neurologically different. So there's a study in there too. These are early studies, so there have to be more to really draw lots of solid conclusions. But so far, what they show is that the neurological processing associated with like quickly reading on the internet, getting distracted by the images, the ads, the ability to click to go to something else before you maybe come back, maybe you don't, you go off on a different tangent. The neurological processing associated with that, this is preliminary, I probably shouldn't even say it, especially on recording, but I'm going to go ahead anyway, is that the processing is much more similar to that of poorer readers than to that of skilled readers. So skilled readers read every word left to right. That doesn't mean that they have a focal point on every word left to right, but they use both their focus point and the periphery vision to see every word left to right as they read, which allows them to hear the exact message that the author tried to convey, and allows them to pull up a visual image, exactly what the author hoped to convey, if they're actually able to follow it as they go. They only go back and skip around when they come to something that doesn't jive with their picture. So then they go back to see, did I miss something? What's wrong with this picture? What do I need to fix? And then they go back to their place and continue. Poorer readers tend to jump all around. They have to use the context in order to understand what they're reading. So they have to find out about the context below in order to understand this part, and then they go back down to there, but maybe they miss something. So there's a lot more jumping around. That is what reading looks like more on the internet, and retention, initial comprehension and retention seems to reflect that also.
Do they do that as well if they're reading out loud? Do they skip around like that?
Their eyes still do the same thing, and their neurological processing still does similar. Reading out loud can help it, but so the effect that it has on the reading aloud is that the reading aloud is slower and tends to be choppier. But reading aloud can actually be something that really helps the poorer reader go through all of these steps. Without going into a lot of detail on this, this is what I could do a whole 2-day workshop on, and I do sometimes, that poorer readers do something more like looking at the text and jumping right to meaning a lot of the time without processing through spoken language. And so reading out loud forces this to happen, so it can help improve their ability to comprehend, even if their reading aloud is still slower than that of a skilled reader. So it's recommended for any of your students that you really feel like have reading comprehension difficulties, if when they go home, they read out loud, that it may help their comprehension. There's kind of 2 different patterns that can be followed, so it may not, but it's worth trying.
They read out loud, or it's read aloud to them?
Well, in this case, I'm talking about them reading aloud. So if they have some basic reading skills, but seem to miss points, don't seem to read left to right, reading aloud can help that. It just forces the issue. It forces them to go through the spoken language processing part of their brain. But reading aloud to them helps build up this connection right here. It doesn't really help so much with this, but it helps with this upper part and helps them comprehend it. It helps them build frameworks that then they can use when they're reading themselves also. So it's not just that it helps them understand that text in the moment better, but especially